Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan Ortegas, and I'm a co-chair of the Advisory Council for the Women's Democracy Network at IRI. And I am very, very honored to have a really good friend, mentor, life guru, Dr. Kerry Healey with me today. We're going to be talking to all of you about your life and your career and how you can be powerful women. I'm really excited about this conversation. This is, of course, one of IRI's Fireside Chats. This is an interview series where we feature senior women leaders like Dr. Healey and chat about their career experiences and professional challenges so that we can share those insights with all of our members. First, a bit about WDN. This year, WDN celebrates its 15th anniversary. So for 15 years, we built a platform to connect inspiring and experienced women leaders around the world and empowering them to meaningfully participate and take on leadership roles within the political process. We have more than 5,000 members in more than 80 countries, and we've directly reached 17,000 women through our trainings, conferences, and workshops. I'd like to join WDN in welcoming this episode's featured guest, as I said, Dr. Kerry Healey. Dr. Healey, thank you so much for joining us. Most of our viewers will know this, but you've held so many titles in your life. You've been the head of a university. You've been the lieutenant governor of Maryland. You've been a foreign policy advisor to a U.S. presidential candidate. There's many NGOs that I've worked with you on. You've been on the board of the American University of Afghanistan. Your bio would take too long for me to repeat, but there's so many women who would like to just achieve one of the goals that you have accomplished on your bio. Just give us some starting advice for women who are getting their education or maybe are new in politics around the world and are trying to make it up the ladder. What's your first general piece of advice you give to anyone in this scenario?
Oh gosh, you start with an easy question. Well, first I should go back and say I was lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, just so that all those lieutenant governors of Maryland aren't angry with me for taking credit for the good work. But I would just say that the thing that has allowed me to move through my career is to always follow my interests and then think about what else they could be applied to. And if something is interesting or different about my career, it's just that I've been able to do a lot of different things and explore a lot of different areas over time. I was a researcher when I first got out of school because that's all I knew how to do. I was a graduate student. So what do? You do research for years and years and years. So I went into a think tank and ended up doing research around public policy, around crime and justice for the U.S. Department of Justice. And I got to think pretty deeply about things like, I got to think about drugs and gangs and domestic violence and child abuse and prison and what happens to people when they leave prison. And I was able to sort of start to think like, okay, I've done what I can do here. I did that for more than a decade. How can I apply that knowledge to the next thing? And so that led rather organically to thinking, I could actually contribute in public policy. And after I was, in government, I realized how important education was and how important entrepreneurship was to accomplishing any public goal. And so that led rather naturally to wanting to be involved with higher education, especially at Babson, where they were focused on entrepreneurship and on business and so forth and so on. And I would like to think that my current position at the Center for Advancing the American Dream came pretty organically out of what I saw, the inspiration that I saw at Babson for so many students who were first generation Americans or who were coming from overseas to the US, seeking their dreams, creating their dreams as entrepreneurs and wanting to share that. So I guess the lesson I would abstract back from that is not to be limited by thinking this is what I'm doing and therefore this is what I need to go deeper and deeper on. Sometimes you can go broad and sometimes you have to think about the skills you're developing as opposed to the discipline or area that you're working in. You've had a pretty diverse career too, Morgan, so I think you appreciate this idea.
I still have a long way to go to catch up with you, but so out of all of those mountains that you've climbed, is there one that you say, this was my most proud moment, this is the pinnacle?
I don't know that there are pinnacles, but there are things that have enduring value. And you do look back and say, that seemed great at the time, but it lasted a split second because it was something that was easily undone by someone else who had a different idea once you left. But there are a few things that I did when I had the opportunity to do, thanks to Governor Romney, who gave me great scope in terms of what I could engage with as Lieutenant Governor, that have had enduring value. And I look back on it and I think that was wonderful. One was simply to be engaged around Melanie's Law. And there was a young girl, 13-year-old girl, Melanie Powell, who was killed by a drunk driver. And her family was willing to come forward and really put the effort in to try to change drunk driving laws in Massachusetts. And, more than 200 people were being killed a year, by drunk drivers, and many more being injured. And we'd never changed those laws. And for once, we were able to muster the political will. And it doesn't seem like that's something that should be hard to do, but it was very hard to do because literally a third of the legislators in the Massachusetts legislature were lawyers who were focused on those kinds of cases, those drunk driving cases. And so changing those laws was something that was going to meet a lot of resistance and had for years. Almost immediately when we changed the laws, when we did succeed, we began to see those numbers of people being killed a year by drunk drivers drop by, of 25% or more. So wow. You will never know who those people are, but those 50 people a year since then who've been walking around and living their lives, and their families have been appreciating their company. I know that there are more people alive today than there would have been if I hadn't passed that law. And so that's something that is profound and it's ineffable. Yeah. I don't know who those people are. I'll never see them. I'll never know how the world would be different, but it's different for a lot of people because of that. And so having that opportunity to change laws that actually impact people's lives, literally their lives in some cases, is very satisfying.
Has that been a motivator for you amongst all the roles that you've had, the ability to be able to do things that are going to change lives? That seems to be a theme I'm hearing you say.
Yes, absolutely. I think impact and the ability to create change and the ability to create positive change in society overall has been a motivator for me throughout, whether it was making policies that I was promoting through the U.S. Department of Justice or as Lieutenant Governor. And as I mentioned, Governor Romney allowed me to get my fingers in a lot of pies there. So it was a great experience. And I think all of us want that impact, don't we? I mean, we all want to feel Absolutely. That what we're doing matters. And now employers everywhere are having to think and reframe positions within the company, to reflect something of value to the individual. So they're not just coming and making widgets all day. You're making widgets that change the world in some manner. And you either are changing it for the better or for the worse. And employers are having to try to figure out how to be pro-social in order to keep people engaged.
Yeah. So I think it's easy for some of our young women who are watching this and to look at everything you've done and accomplished and think, oh my goodness, that seems unattainable, or I'd love to do that, but I have all of these things that are holding me back. And I don't think that people realize that there's actually a ton of struggles for all of us along the way. Dina Powell and I talked about this in one of these fireside chats, that it looks easy when the camera's on you and you're in the moment, but people don't see all of the challenges that you had to overcome to get to that point. Can you describe some of them to us and what you had to overcome and how you did it?
Sure. And at least for me anyway, it's pretty easy to forget some of those struggles later on. You can kind of put them aside and say like, okay, I'm done with that. I don't need to deal with that. But I came from Daytona Beach, Florida. My family was middle class or lower middle class. My dad was intermittently unemployed, and at 15 he had a massive heart attack and couldn't work anymore. And so my mom was a public school teacher. Women in those years were being very, very underpaid for their labor. My mom started with a master's degree being paid $7,000 a year in 1968 to be a teacher. Wow. And so when my dad had this heart attack, it massively reduced our income in the household. And I was getting ready to go to college in 3 years, and we were trying to figure out how does that work? You know, we were still thinking about how do we keep the house. And then all of the money that had been saved for my college education went into his healthcare. So we were wiped out by his hospital stay. So there was a big economic struggle that that my family faced early on, and I was lucky that my mom was such a strong woman that she never gave me any doubt that I would be able to do whatever I wanted to do. And so she didn't try to limit my dreams as a result of that lack of financial capacity. She told me that, you know, you get into the best college you can get into and we'll figure out how to pay for it, which sounded kind of crazy. But
and by the way, she got into Harvard, so she took your mother's advice literally.
I took it very literally, and at the end, I compared the colleges I got into, and I said, I will go to the one that is cheapest. You know, the one that you know gives me the most money to go there. I will go to it. So I was pretty agnostic, and it was all about money. I also worked for 3 years at doing multiple jobs, you know, during my high school years, so that I'd actually saved quite a bit of money, you know, by the time I graduated, even though I was working at one of the jobs at minimum wage, and then at another one, I'd learned to be a computer programmer and was getting paid much better. But I think that early crucible of my father's illness and being, you know, having that rather significant financial setback taught me a lot. And, you know, and going to a college where there was a significant wealth and not, you know, being a sophisticated person who understood those worlds, I had to learn a lot quickly. But you can get past all that. You can cram in lots of learning fast. And I'm inspired these days when I'm talking to entrepreneurs. I have a podcast called Start Small, Dream Big, where I talk to small business people about their stories. And I ask many of the same questions that you're asking. And, you know, I'm always inspired by how people just, you know, figure out how to get around obstacles. And there is no successful person out there who hasn't had to climb some pretty significant mountains to get to where they go.
That's right. That's right. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's, you know, you take each challenge as it comes in your life and you try to overcome it. But this sort of myth that women like you or me or Dina, you know, just sort of got there. It's important for people to know that we've faced lots of struggles on the way there as well. You know, one of the reasons that I asked both you and Dina Powell-McCormick to do this fireside chat with me is that the two of you have made such a big impression on my life. And I hate to call you both mentors because I feel like you're not that much older than me, and I feel like you're a dear friend.
Okay, well, let's set that straight. I am that much older than you are. So let's be clear. Don't let anyone be fooled by that assumption, okay?
Well, it doesn't feel like it, but we've been around the world together, and there are so many, every pivotal moment that I've had in my career, I call Kerry. And I don't say this to you a lot. I should say this more to you because you mean so much to me, you know, whether it's personal life decisions, having a baby, you know, I know that I can call you about personal and professional life decisions. And the past 15 years, you have been such an enormous influence on me. So I'd love to know who has been that person for you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. That's such a sweet thing, and I hope that I've encouraged you in the right directions. I know I encouraged you to embrace motherhood, and that you will enjoy that immensely, as I know you are. So for me, it was actually this crazy group of elderly ladies when I was in my late 20s in New York, and my husband was working maybe 90 hours a week. At a bank, and I was alone doing my graduate work. I was writing my PhD, and I was going crazy. I mean, it was like how the kind of experience a lot of people were having during COVID, where like I never walked outside, I never saw another human, and so I decided, okay, I have to volunteer. I have to do some volunteer work because I'm going to lose my mind. And I went and I volunteered at the New York YWCA. And so I don't know, maybe most people think of the YWCA as a like a pool and maybe a place where you go and do arts and crafts, or I don't know what, but the YWCA is actually a women's social movement. And it's one of the most profound women's social movements of the last century. And so I got into this environment where there were all these women who had been in there for many, many years, maybe 50 years of their lives. And I remember going to this one reception, and someone said to me, okay, there are very many nice, ladies here. Please, decide, talk to some people and decide who you'd like to be mentored by or who you'd like to work with. And I had no idea who these women were. And after talking to a number of people, I said, I think I'd like to get to know that woman with the blue hair. This is back in the days when elderly women would like literally dye their hair blue, and with matching blue goggles, like as glasses. I'd like to get to know her. And I'd like to get to know this like very refined, lovely looking lady, over there, with the gloves on. I liked her as well. And it turned out that I'd picked out Mary Rockefeller, Lawrence Rockefeller's wife, who was in her 80s at the time, and Elizabeth Luce Moore, Henry Luce's sister, who was in her 90s at the time. Wow. And they both were on the World YWCA's board that represented the YWCA at the United Nations. And so they got me involved with the UN. They talked to me a lot about international human rights. And they showed me how to be activists, but also very prim and proper activists, ones that could get along with everyone, people who could be polite, people who could be insistent without being rude. They taught me a bunch of social skills that were really helpful to me once I became a politician. And I was just so grateful that I had this period of overlap. And one of the ladies, Constance Tate, who's now more than 95 years old, I would say, and with whom I'm still in contact, has just been a great mentor to me throughout my life. And I really appreciate those ladies.
That's so wonderful. I mean, what really amazing mentors as well. On that note, actually, my next question was going to be about what it's like to be a woman navigating the career path that you've had. I think women from around the world, from various age ranges, will be watching this Fireside chat, Kerry, and all of the various countries are on different paths and different levels of achieving equality for women in their country. And you and I even have, I've benefited, I know my generation has benefited from women like you who had, little children and elementary, middle school, I think, whenever you were running for lieutenant governor and then later running for governor. And, we had to see someone do it to know that it would be possible. So tell us how being a woman has affected your career. How has it helped? How has it been a challenge if it has been, and how you navigated all of that, especially for some of the women watching who are still going through some of the challenges of gender equality?
Yeah. Gender is such a difficult subject for women of my age. I'm 61. And so I grew up in the 70s. I was a teenager during the 1970s. And when everything was, it seemed like the world opened up to women. And, suddenly we were being told that we could do whatever we wanted to do. And I was an only child. So I was raised pretty gender neutral, I would say. I had, toy guns and knives and played Risk with my dad and went out, hiking. But also I was aware of being a woman. And my mom made clear to me, what some of those limitations had been for her generation and the World War II generation, and how she expected me to go beyond that. And she always made it very clear that she expected me to accomplish a lot. So I felt very comfortable, I think coming out of my household in terms of gender, feeling very, affirmed and encouraged to do whatever I wanted to do. I don't think I really began to understand any limits around gender until much later in my life. And even in politics, I felt that as long as I was informed and ideologically aligned with my party, et cetera, that I was going to receive all the support that I needed. I was actually the the second woman head of the Republican Party in Massachusetts at that time. I was the third woman lieutenant governor. So there had been pioneers before me in Massachusetts, but I was the first woman president of Babson College. And I have to say that having been a first, a second, and a third, being first is hard. And to the extent that there are still places where there haven't been women. So for example, I ran for governor in Massachusetts and lost, and no woman has broken that barrier, and 5 have tried. And we actually all get together sometimes, which is odd bedfellows, because we've run against each other and said bad things about each other. But we actually have this bond because we all lost. And we know now that it wasn't necessarily because of what we were saying. It was probably more that people weren't ready. People weren't quite ready for women's leadership. And so while it hasn't been extremely tangible, to me, being first, especially leading a business college, brought it into focus to me that people were hesitant about women's leadership, that they weren't quite sure that women could do the same things that men could do, and that you had to work 3 times as hard and be 3 times as good as someone else in that environment. And so I would say that that's been a surprising and disappointing part of my later life, because I didn't really hit that wall where gender seemed important until I was maybe in my 50s, right? I'd been able to just kind of power through. And then all of the conflicts that are associated also with being a mother and a wife, while you're trying to approach the pinnacle of your professional career, which you are sort of approaching and doing during your 40s and 50s. They all came together. And so I confronted, divorce, and I confronted a number of personal challenges that were all sort of, coming together at one time. And a lot of it had to do with gender and assumptions around gender roles. So.
Well, and I think it's powerful that you shared that, because, women need to know, listen, it's important that you run for office or lead a university or all the things that you've done. You'll face challenges, but persistence overcomes them. I was hoping actually that we could give a little bit of a piece of practical advice to the women, watching. You mentioned that early in your career, you had gotten involved with an organization in New York where you found mentors there. Can you just give a little practical advice about any organizations that you think women should join? What should they be looking for? How do they sort of develop that savviness of networking and finding professional mentors?
Well, they should join whatever organizations interest them. First of all, that should be the goal. There isn't sort of a magic organization that's going to propel you, but there are lots of them out there, and many of them are good. But what I would say is that you should try to become a board member of these organizations early on. And being a member of a board when I was in my 30s really began to help me figure out how do organizations work, how do boards work, how do startups work, how do more well-established organizations work. And all of that knowledge will help you advance your career, whether it's because you need to lead an organization with a board, or whether it is because that organization might be able to help you in some manner to advance your career or your cause. So those kinds of early experiences, and volunteering is a really easy way to get that door open and start getting experience when maybe you can't get it in any other way. And quite often in organizations, voluntary organizations, the work goes to the people who are willing to do it. And so if you're young and energetic and have time, especially maybe if you're a young parent and you have a more flexible schedule, that might actually be a good time for you to start trying to build those skills and that experience that's going to help you become more effective in a different position later on. And I certainly wouldn't want to leave people with the impression that I feel like you can't overcome any barriers associated with gender. I think you absolutely can. But but they still do exist. Even now, they still do exist. And you just have to be mindful of where you are in that continuum of areas where there's either people have been able to trod the path in front of you, or they haven't. And if they haven't, your road is going to be harder. And, but if there's a big line of women who've successfully navigated the path before, run after them, go fast, because that's an opening.
I think that's wonderful advice. And especially when you talk about being on boards and being involved and active. I mean, some of the best memories that I have are being in Afghanistan with you, with our little NGO that we had with Robert O'Brien, who later became the National Security Advisor. And you rescued me and let me sleep in your room because there was this horrible room that I was in. But then I remember being in the parliament and all the meetings that we had and the insights and then speed up, that was probably we were there probably at least a decade ago, if not longer, together.
I think so. Yeah.
Maybe longer than that now. And we just recently worked together, Kerry and I did, to get an entire family out, one of our friends that we were with in Afghanistan. So
actually one of the people who was funded by that program, where we were there interviewing Afghan scholars and who were lawyers and judges who wanted to come and study rule of law in the US. And one of our first graduates, or actually one of our first graduate who went to Harvard Law School, was someone who we were able to get out. And he was the first graduate of Harvard Law School in Afghanistan. So thank God he and his family are safely in Canada, thanks to your work and Kelly Craft and Robert O'Brien's and others.
And yours. So I have a question that I'm going to end on that I like to ask everybody. And it's one that's asked a lot, but I think it's important. What piece of advice did you not get whenever you were a young professional that you wish someone gave you? What's the one thing that you thought, oh my gosh, why didn't anyone tell me that?
Okay.
I know it's a tough one. That's why I ended on it.
It is a tough one. I think it's probably just that you wish you'd known what people 10 years older than you know. So I had these wonderful older mentors, and they could give me this broad, sweep of knowledge. But the real secrets that you need to unlock lie in the people who are only about 10 to 15 years ahead of you, because they can still remember the difficulties of how to get through the period where you are. And so if you can find someone who is very close to where you want to be in 10 years, and they're about 10 years older than you are, then that person is really someone you should get to know. And you should ask them questions, because it's fresh in their mind and their information is not so dated that it's irrelevant. It's still probably pretty relevant. And so I didn't have too many near peer mentors during my life. And if I did have them, it was by accident. But when I did have them, it was like, oh, you've got good knowledge. You really, you can help me steer through this in a way that other people can't. So maybe it's just that perception of what you're looking for in a mentor. And I think, those relationships can be fantastic. So I wish someone had turned me on to that sooner.
Well, I want to thank IRI and the Women's Democracy Network, and of course, Dr. Kerry Healey, for this fireside chat. I hope all of you enjoyed it. I hope you're getting something out of these. We're always here to help. Thank you, IRI. Thank you, WDN. Thank you, Dr. Kerry Healey.
Thank you, Morgan.